Imani Carter had spent 2 years convincing herself she did not hate her boss. She told herself he was simply cold, the way some glaciers were beautiful, the way some old buildings looked best in winter. She told herself a man who flew her across the world for charity garners, who signed off on her medical insurance without a single condescending comment, could not, by any reasonable definition, be hated. And she told herself, again and again, that the storm warning glowing red on the captain's console was just another spreadsheet, the kind Marcus Knight would dismiss with a tap of one long brown finger before turning back to his quarterly calls. She was wrong about the storm. Within 48 hours, the only things left of Marcus Knight's 200-foot yacht would be a battered lifeboat, a twisted ankle, and a small, uninhabited island so quiet she could hear him breathing on the other side of a fire. That stretch of sand was still 2 days away. Today, on a Friday morning in late September, Imani was simply standing on a wooden marina in Castry, watching her boss refuse to look at the sky. Marcus Knight stood at the edge of the dock, with both hands in the pockets of a charcoal linen suit, the sleeves rolled to his forearms, the shoulders perfectly fitted, every line of him expensive and unbothered. He was 34 years old, and built like a man who used to row before he learned to run boardrooms. His skin was a deep, warm brown, like polished walnut in good light, and his hair was clipped close at the sides, with a neat, low fade that Imani had once heard a junior banker describe, in awe, as barbershop on Madison Avenue. The barber flew in from Brooklyn for him. Imani had booked the flights. He did not turn when she approached. He never did. He simply held out one hand, palm up, the way a surgeon waits for a scalpel. "Coffee, Mr. Knight." "Thank you, Miss Carter." He did not say her first name. He had never said her first name. In 2 years of 70-hour weeks, he had said Miss Carter 817 times, and Imani exactly 0. She had counted, once, in a hotel room in Geneva, after he had left a $10,000 bonus on her dresser without a card. The bonus had felt like an insult. The missing card had felt worse. She handed him the cup. Their fingers did not touch. They never did. "The captain says we should delay departure," she said, gentle, professional, the way she had been trained to deliver bad news at exactly the volume he preferred. "There is a tropical depression east of Barbados. He says by tonight it will be a named storm." "Named what?" "Probably Henrietta." "Henrietta," Marcus repeated. And for the first time that morning, his mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Henrietta is a librarian, Miss Carter, not a hurricane." "Captain Voss disagrees." "Captain Voss," Marcus said very calmly, "is not on the board of the Knight Foundation. The board of the Knight Foundation is, at this moment, gathering on Marigot Bay for a charity dinner that we have promised to attend. We will arrive on time." Imani did not say what she was thinking, which was, of course we will, because Marcus Knight has never once been late, not even to his own father's funeral. She wrote that down, mentally, the way she wrote everything down, and tucked it next to 2 years' worth of similar lines. Someday she would put them all in a book. Someday she would not work for him anymore. Some days, like today, that thought was the only soft thing she carried. A glossy tender pulled up to the dock, and 3 more passengers stepped out, all in white. Vivian Ashworth came last, on the arm of her father, in a cream silk wrap and large dark glasses, the kind a woman wears when she has not slept and would prefer no one know. Vivian was 29, very pale, very lovely, and very engaged to Marcus Knight. She had been engaged to him for 11 months. The wedding had been postponed twice. Imani had postponed it. "Marcus," Vivian said, and kissed the air beside his cheek. He did not turn his head. "You are late," Marcus said. "I am on time," Vivian said. "You are Ernie, as always." She turned to Imani with the polished, careful brightness of a woman who has decided that being polite to staff is a form of charity. "Imani, you look exhausted. Do they not let you sleep?" "I sleep," Imani said. "Just not on Mr. Knight's calendar." Vivian laughed. Marcus did not. He held the gangway for her, then for her father, then for the chief financial officer of Knight Industries, who was already on a call. He did not hold it for Imani. Imani stepped on board with her tablet under one arm, her tote on her shoulder, and her stomach in a small, unhappy knot. The yacht was called Eleanor, after his mother. Imani had researched the mother once. Eleanor Knight had been a pediatric nurse in Detroit before she married Robert Knight. She had raised her son on stories about people who took care of one another. She had been gone for 9 years. Marcus had been 25. Imani thought, sometimes, that her boss was so cold because his only example of warmth had been taken from him too early. She thought, sometimes, that this was a generous thing to think about a man who had once made an intern cry over a misaligned font on a slide deck. She put both thoughts away. She had work to do. "Boardroom," Marcus said, already walking, and Imani followed. By 11, the yacht was an hour out of Castries, and the sky had turned a strange, polished grey, the colour of a watch face. The board meeting on the upper deck had run 12 minutes long. Imani had served 2 rounds of espresso, taken minutes in shorthand, and slipped into the galley to confirm dietary requirements for the gala dinner that, in her private opinion, they were not going to reach. She was wrong about that, too. They reached the gala. They reached it briefly. By 6 in the evening, the Eleanor was tied up at the small private quay of Marigot Bay, and Imani was helping Vivienne fix the strap of her sandal in a guest cabin that smelled of lilies. The sky was now a deep, bruised purple. Imani could hear Captain Voss's voice on the bridge, sharp and unhappy, and the answering rumble of Marcus's voice, low, contained, immovable. "He never listens, does he?" Vivienne said. She was sitting on the edge of a small velvet stool, a flute of champagne in one hand, her foot raised slightly so Imani could thread the broken strap. Her ankle was thin and pale. Imani's hands worked carefully. The buckle was a tiny gold shell. "He listens," Imani said. "He just rarely changes his mind." "Is that the same thing?" "For Mr. Knight, no." Vivienne considered her in the mirror. The dark glasses were off now. Her eyes were tired, and a little kind, and a little sad. "You take very good care of him," Vivienne said. "Better than I do." Imani did not look up. "It is my job, Miss Ashworth." "I know," Vivienne said. "That is what worries me." Imani fastened the buckle, set the foot down, and stood. "There," she said. "It will hold for the dinner." "Thank you, Imani." It was the first time Vivienne had said her first name in 11 months. Imani made a small, careful note of it, the way she made small, careful notes of everything, and walked out of the cabin into a corridor that was already swaying, very gently, beneath her feet. The dinner was held in a stone pavilion above the bay. 40 guests in white linen, 4 chefs flown in from St. Bart's, 8 courses, 2 speeches. Marcus gave the second speech. He spoke for 4 minutes about the foundation, about clean water in 3 Caribbean nations, about the difference between a charity and a partnership. He did not look at Vivienne. He did not look at Imani. He looked at the back wall of the pavilion, which was made of painted plaster, and which was already beginning to drip, very faintly, with the first warm rain of Henrietta. Imani, watching from the staff table, felt a strange, unbidden tenderness flare in her chest. He believed in clean water. He really did. The man who had made the intern cry over a font also believed, with all his expensive heart, in clean water. She thought, very briefly, if he were anyone else, I could love him. Then she thought, thank God he is not anyone else. And then the wind changed. By midnight, Henrietta was a Category 2 storm, and the Eleanor was no longer at her quay. Captain Voss had ordered an emergency departure, hoping to outrun the storm's edge by running southwest, sheltering behind a smaller island called Petit Sable before dawn. Half the guests had stayed at the resort. Marcus had not. Marcus had a meeting in Manhattan on Monday, and the Eleanor was, in his unsentimental view, the fastest way home. Imani did not argue. She had stopped arguing about Marcus's schedule years ago. She packed Vivian's small overnight bag, her own larger one, 2 crates of board documents, and the wooden case of medication Marcus took every night for an old fencing-related shoulder, which he had still never, in 2 years, admitted to her was an injury and not a vitamin. By 2 in the morning, the wind was high enough to lift water off the deck. By 3, the Eleanor had lost her tender. By 4, Vivian was being violently seasick in her cabin, and Imani was on her knees beside the bed, holding her hair, murmuring nonsense in the same low voice her own mother had once used over her own bowed head. "Breathe through your nose, Miss Ashworth. Slowly. There. There." "Imani." "Yes." "Tell him I am sorry." "For what?" "For not loving him properly." Imani did not answer. The yacht rolled hard. A glass slid off a shelf and shattered. Vivian began to cry, very quietly, the way well-bred women cry when they have been taught all their lives not to. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He was without his jacket. His shirt was wet across one shoulder. His face was the same stillness it had been in the boardroom that morning. Only now Imani could see, for the first time, that the stillness was a discipline and not a temperament. "Get her into a life jacket," he said. "Yes, Mr. Knight." "Both of you, now." He did not say please. He never did. But he stayed in the doorway until Imani had Vivian upright and into the orange vest. And he stayed also when the yacht rolled again and Imani went to her knees and the tablet she had been carrying skidded across the floor and out into the corridor. He picked it up. He handed it back to her without comment. Their fingers touched, briefly, for the first time in 2 years. His hand was warm. She remembered, much later, that this had surprised her. She had assumed, somewhere quiet inside herself, that a cold man would be cold all the way through. The last hour on board the Eleanor moved in pieces, the way bad memories always do. Captain Voss on the bridge, shouting an order, the lights stuttering, a long, slow lean of the deck that did not stop where decks were supposed to stop. The crew's voices, sharp and orderly, the way only well-trained voices are when everything is no longer fine. Vivian being lifted, white-faced, into the first lifeboat with her father and the chief financial officer. Marcus, on the rail above, signaling to the second boat. Imani hearing him say her surname, only her surname, in a voice she had never heard him use. "Carter." "Yes." "Now." She climbed. The rail was wet. Her shoes slipped. Marcus's hand closed around her wrist, hard, and held, and pulled, and did not let go even when she was over the edge and into the second boat. Even when she was sitting on the wet bench and Captain Voss was shouting at someone above, and the crew was lowering them down a long swinging cable into a sea that was not friendly. He climbed in last, beside her. The boat hit the water with a long, shocking slap. The cable was cut. They drifted away from the Eleanor on a black wave taller than any she had ever seen. That was the last time she saw the yacht standing upright. The night that followed, Imani would later refuse to describe in any detail. She would say only that it was wet and very cold for the tropics, and that she held the hand of the man she had spent 2 years trying not to like, and that he held hers back, and that neither of them spoke. She would say that at some point she stopped being afraid and only became tired, and that being tired in the dark on the open sea is its own kind of prayer. She would say that the engine on the lifeboat ran for 40 minutes and then stopped, and that the second one ran for 10, and then they were drifting, and that she did not know what direction they drifted in, only that the wind was warm now and the rain was thinning, and that Marcus Knight, for the first time in 2 years, had taken off his jacket and put it over her shoulders. She would say, much later, that this was the moment she began to forgive him. Dawn came pink and silver over a flat sea. The lifeboat had drifted onto a long, curving beach of white-grey sand, and the bow had nosed itself, almost politely, between two coconut palms that leaned at the same kind angle. The other lifeboat was nowhere in sight. The yacht was nowhere in sight. The radio was wet. The signal flare was wet. Imani was wet. Marcus was wet. The world, freshly washed, was very, very quiet. She sat up. Her braids were heavy with seawater. Her white cotton blouse, which had been crisp at the gala, now hung off her shoulder like a wet bandage. Her right ankle hurt. Her left palm was scraped raw from the cable. Her tablet, somehow, was still under her arm. She looked at the tablet. Then she looked at the ocean. Then she began, very softly, to laugh. Marcus, beside her on the bench, opened one eye. "Miss Carter? Mr. Knight? What is funny?" "The tablet." He looked at the tablet. He looked at the ocean. He did not laugh, but the line of his mouth, which had been a straight executive line for 2 years, did something almost human. Battery. 3%. Signal. None. "Of course," he said, and closed his eye again. "Of course there is none." She climbed out of the boat. Her ankle protested. She put weight on it carefully and decided it was not broken. She walked 20 paces up the beach, then 20 paces back. The island, as far as she could see, was small. A white curve of sand on this side, low palms and sea grape inland. A dark green ridge at the center, no more than 30 meters high. No buildings, no smoke, no road, no people. She came back. Marcus had stood up. He was barefoot. He had taken off his shoes during the night, she remembered now. He had given her his jacket. He had not asked for it back. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "Report." It was, she would later think, the most absurd word he could possibly have chosen. And it was also exactly the word she needed. She straightened her shoulders. She lifted her tablet, drained though it was, the way she lifted it in his office. She gave him a report. "We are on a small, uninhabited island, sir. Approximately 1 square kilometer by my eye. No structures, no residents, no boats, no smoke. We have 1 lifeboat, 2 paddles, 2 life jackets, 1 inflatable raft seat, 1 wet emergency kit, 1 wet radio, 1 wet signal flare, my tablet at 3% battery, your phone, your watch, my tote bag, and the contents of my pockets, which are the keys to the office, a hair tie, a sealed pack of mints, and my employee identification card. The weather appears to be calm. The wind is from the southeast. The tide, at present, is low. I would estimate sunrise was approximately 20 minutes ago, which means the time is approximately 6:20 in the morning, local. We have not eaten in 14 hours. We have not slept properly in 20. I am uninjured, except for the ankle and the hand. You appear to have a cut on your forehead and a slight limp on your right side. We are alive." She stopped. She had not meant to add the last line. She had not meant to say any of it the way she had said it, which was steady at the start and not so steady by the end. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were the color of strong coffee in clear glass, and tired now, with a small line between them. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "Thank you." It was the first time, in 2 years, he had ever thanked her without a transactional reason behind it. She nodded once, sharply, and turned away, and walked down the beach, because she did not want him to see that her eyes had gone hot. The first day on the island was, in retrospect, the most polite day of Imani's life. They did not yet know each other. They had worked across a desk for 2 years and across an ocean that morning, and now they were 2 strangers in soaked formal clothing on a beach the size of a small Manhattan park. and they did not know how to be. So they were polite. Marcus said, "Miss Carter, would you mind helping me drag the lifeboat further up the sand?" Imani said, "Of course not, Mr. Knight." They dragged the lifeboat further up the sand. The rope cut into their palms. He took the heavier end without comment. She took the lighter end, also without comment. He said, "Miss Carter, would you object to building a small fire?" She said, "I would not, Mr. Knight." He said, "Do you, by any chance, know how?" She said, "Yes. My father was a forest ranger in Georgia." He looked at her. It was a look she had never seen on his face before. It was not surprise. It was something softer, as if a small, locked drawer in his understanding of her had quietly slid open. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not know that." "You never asked, sir." It came out sharper than she had meant. She heard it land. She did not take it back. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Build the fire, please. I will collect wood." He limped slightly as he walked into the trees. She watched him go. The back of his white shirt was streaked grey with seawater and grit. His shoulders, which she had only ever seen tailored, were very wide and very straight, and there was a small dark stain at his right shoulder that was, she was almost certain, the rust mark of a fresh graze. She looked away from it. She put on her professional calm. She gathered dried palm fronds and a small pyramid of broken sea grape branches and a curl of bark that would catch quickly. By the time he came back with an armful of larger driftwood, the kindling was ready, and she had snapped 3 matches from the wet emergency kit and was patiently turning the 4th one in her fingers, drying it against her cotton blouse. He set down the wood. He watched her work. He did not interrupt. The 4th match caught. The kindling caught. The little fire breathed, then exhaled, then steadied, and the curl of smoke went straight up into a pale gold morning. Imani sat back on her heels. "There." "Miss Carter." "Yes, Mr. Knight?" "Imani." She looked up. He was kneeling on the sand on the opposite side of the fire, the cut on his forehead a small dark line above his eyebrow, his white shirt streaked, his eyes very clear. "I would prefer," he said, slowly, the way a man speaks who is choosing each word as if it costs him, "if, for the duration of our stay on this island, you would call me Marcus." She looked at him over the small, clean fire. "And what would you call me?" "Imani," he said again, "if you would allow it." She thought about all the small, careful notes she had made for 2 years. She thought about Geneva and the bonus on the dresser and the missing card. She thought about the airline tickets and the broken sandal and the storm warning he had not believed. She thought about his hand on her wrist on the rail of the Eleanor, hard and warm and steady, refusing to let her fall. She said, "Yes." He said, "Thank you, Imani." The fire crackled between them. A frigate bird passed, very high, very white, against a clean morning sky. That was the end of the first day's politeness. After that, there was no more Miss Carter, and no more Mr. Knight, and the small, careful distance she had built between herself and her boss began, very gently, to fall apart, the way a sandcastle falls apart at the first kind tide. By the end of the second day, they had done a number of practical things. They had pulled the lifeboat all the way to the tree line and turned it on its side as a windbreak. They had laid out the wet contents of the emergency kit on a flat rock to dry. 2 foil blankets, a small sealed bottle of fresh water, a packet of glucose tablets, a coil of fishing line, 3 hooks, a folding tool with a small blade, a whistle, and a tiny waterproof box of waterproof matches that had, inconveniently, not been waterproof. They had walked the perimeter of the island and confirmed that it was, indeed, uninhabited, and that there was no fresh water visible at the surface. They had dug a shallow depression in the sand at the foot of the green ridge, and they had covered it with palm fronds, and they had watched, that night, as condensation formed on the inside of the fronds and ran down into the sand as the smallest, slowest, sweetest gift. They had shared that water, 2 careful sips each, in silence, and then they had sat on opposite sides of a fire that Imani built every evening, and Marcus fed every evening, and they had begun, very slowly, to talk. He asked her about her father. She told him. The forest ranger in North Georgia, the cabin on a piece of state land, the way her father had taught her to read smoke before he had taught her to read books, the cancer that had taken him at 58, her mother, still alive, still in Atlanta, still working as a school librarian, still calling her every Sunday, her brother Daniel, 2 years younger, an engineer in Houston, the small, ordinary, sturdy shape of a black, middle-class American family that the trade press, for some reason, never imagined when they imagined the assistant of a billionaire. She asked him about his mother. He hesitated, the way he had hesitated when he had asked her to call him Marcus. Then he told her. Detroit. A 2-story house on a quiet street. Eleanor Knight, pediatric nurse, born in Alabama, raised in Michigan, the daughter of a postal worker and a pastor. His father, Robert Knight, the second-generation owner of a small shipping company, who had loved Eleanor with a steadiness that had embarrassed both of them and delighted the entire street. The way his mother had read to him at night, even when he was 12 and pretending he was too old. The way she had called him baby until the day she could no longer speak. The leukemia, the hospice. The way the house had felt afterwards. The way his father had moved them to New York because Detroit had become unbearable. The way Robert Knight had then, very efficiently, built the shipping company into Knight Industries, and very inefficiently, never recovered. The way his father had also, 3 years ago, gone too. Imani listened. She did not interrupt. When he stopped speaking, she did not say, "I am so sorry," because she had heard him say once, in passing, that he had received that sentence too many times in his life to find any comfort in it. She said, instead, "Your mother sounds like a person I would have liked very much." He looked across the fire at her. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have liked you a great deal." Imani turned her face slightly, so the firelight would not show the way her eyes had gone hot again. On the 3rd day, Marcus turned his ankle. He had climbed the green ridge to look for the wreckage of the Eleanor, or for any other lifeboat, or for any sign of a passing ship. He had come down too quickly on the loose volcanic rock at the top, and his right foot had gone into a small crevice, and he had wrenched the ankle hard. He had not called out. He had walked down the ridge, slowly, on his own, gripping branches, and he had arrived at the camp white around the mouth and refusing to limp. Imani had taken one look at him. "Sit. It is not necessary. Sit, Marcus." He had sat. She had taken off his shoe. The ankle was swollen, the size of a small grapefruit, the skin tight and warm, not broken, sprained badly. She had soaked one of the foil blankets in seawater, wrapped it around the joint, and elevated the foot on the lifeboat seat. She had cut a strip from the lining of her tote bag and bound the ankle. She had done it the way her father had once bound her own twisted ankle when she was 9 years old, on a hike in the Chattahoochee, and he had carried her, on his back, 3 miles back to the truck. When she was finished, Marcus was watching her. "Imani." "Yes?" "You are a very competent person." "I work for a very demanding man." She paused, the strip of fabric still in her fingers, and added the question she had been turning over since the lifeboat. "Your shoulder. The medication you take at night. You have not asked for it." He did not pretend not to understand. "It went down with the Eleanor." "I know. I am asking what happens without it." "It is an old fencing graze. A tendon, not a bone. The medication is anti-inflammatory. Without it, the shoulder will be stiff in the morning and worse at night. I will manage." "You will tell me," she said. if it becomes more than stiff. I will tell you. Marcus. Yes? That is also the first time, in 2 years, you have admitted that Case held medicine and not a vitamin. He almost smiled. On this island, he said, I appear to be confessing everything. The line of his mouth did the not quite smile again. He sounds insufferable. He is. Has he ever what? Has he ever told you that you are a very competent person? She thought about this. She thought about 2 years of bonuses left on dressers without cards. She thought about emails sent at 3 in the morning and answered before 6. She thought about meetings she had saved with a single side note, deals she had unstuck with a single phone call, fonts she had aligned, flights she had rebooked, lives she had organized, down to the color of the sugar in the espresso. No, she said. He has not. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Imani. Yes? You are a very competent person. I am sorry I never told you. I am sorry for many things I never told you. She did not answer. She finished tying the strip of fabric. She stood up, walked to the sea, and for the first time in 2 years, she let her shoulders fall, and she cried, very quietly, with her back to him, while a warm Caribbean wind dried the tears on her cheeks. He let her. He did not call her back. That was its own small kindness. That night, they shared the second sip of condensed water in a silence that was no longer awkward. By the 4th day, a small set of routines had emerged. Imani built the fire in the morning. Marcus collected wood. Imani checked the water trap fronds. Marcus baited the line and fished from the rocks at the south end on his good ankle. They had caught, between them, 2 small silver fish on the 2nd evening, and 3 on the 3rd, and they had cooked them over the fire on green sticks, and they had eaten them slowly, with their fingers, the way Imani had eaten brook trout with her father in Georgia. And it was, she thought, one of the best meals of her life. On the 4th evening, Marcus said, I should tell you about Vivian. Imani said, You do not have to. I would like to. She nodded. She fed the fire. He told her. The story was not complicated. Robert Knight, on his deathbed, had asked Marcus to consider Vivian Ashworth as a future bride. The Ashworth family had stood by the Knight family during the worst quarter of the worst year, and Robert Knight had been a man who paid his debts. Vivian had agreed, in a small private dinner, to a long engagement. Marcus had agreed, in the same small private dinner, to honor his father's wish. And do you, Imani said, very carefully, love her? He looked into the fire. No. She was quiet. Does she love you? She loves the idea of being married to a steady man. I am sorry to say that I do not think she has ever loved me. That is not the same. No, he said. It is not. The fire crackled. A line of small grey crabs moved sideways across the sand, 10 meters away, in perfect formation. Marcus. Yes? Why are you telling me this? He did not look up. Because I do not want to lie to you, he said. Not on this island. Not anywhere. Not anymore. She did not answer. She did not trust, yet, what she might say. She fed the fire. On the 5th day they fought. It was a clean fight, the kind that good people have, and the kind only desperate fatigue can produce. It began with the water trap. Imani had risen early. She had checked the fronds. 2 of the 4 had collapsed in a small wind during the night, and the water that had collected on their underside had spilled into the sand. The other 2 had held, and offered, between them, a thimble. She had not slept well. Her ankle was throbbing. Her braids were stiff with salt. She had not eaten properly in 5 days. She came back to the camp carrying the thimble of water in the small folding cup from the emergency kit, and she set it down beside Marcus, who was sitting with his bad foot raised, watching the sea. "Drink it. You drink half." "Drink it, Marcus. I had more last night." "You did not." "I did." "Imani." "Marcus." "You did not." She set the cup down too hard. A few drops jumped out and were lost. "Do not contradict me." He looked at her, slowly. "I will contradict you," he said, very calmly. "If you are putting yourself behind me for the second day in a row. I have noticed. I am not a fool. I am not blind. I am not, as it happens, the man you think I am." "You do not know what I think you are." "I have a fair idea." "Then you are not as smart as the trade press claims, Mr. Knight." The Mr. Knight was a slap. She heard it land. She did not take it back. He breathed out, slowly. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "Imani," he said, "please drink the water." "You drink it." "We drink it together." "There is not enough together." "Then we share what there is." He picked up the cup. He held it across the small fire. His hand was steady. His eyes were very clear and very tired. "I am asking you," he said, "to drink half of this. And then I will drink half of this. And then we will go and gather more fronds, you and I, and we will rebuild the trap together. Because I am not, in fact, an executive on this island. I am a man with one good ankle and one bad ankle. And I am tired. And I am thirsty. And I am, increasingly, in love with a woman who is too proud to share a thimble of water with me." The fire crackled. Imani did not move. She had been standing with one fist clenched at her side. The fist opened, slowly, the way a flower opens. She sat down, opposite him, on the sand. She took the cup. She drank half. She handed it back. He drank half. She did not look at him. Her eyes were burning. Her throat was doing something it had not done in 2 years. "Marcus." "Yes?" "You did not just say that." "I did." "That is a very impractical thing to have said." "Yes." "On a desert island." "Yes." "To a woman who is very tired." "Yes." "Who is also." "Who is also." She stopped. He waited. "Who is also," she said, "in love with you." It came out, in the end, very quietly. The fire heard it. The wind heard it. A frigate bird somewhere very high perhaps heard it as well. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them. "Imani." "Yes." "Thank you." He did not, at that moment, get up from his side of the fire, and she did not get up from hers. He did not reach across, and she did not reach across. They sat, in the sun, 2 meters apart, with a small empty cup between them. And they did the thing that grown people do when they have just said something that cannot be unsaid. They breathed. They let it stand. They let it be true. Then they got up, together, and they went to gather more fronds. That night, the rain came back, soft and warm, and they sat under the lifeboat windbreak, shoulder to shoulder, with the foil blankets across their knees. And Marcus did not sleep, and Imani did not sleep, and neither of them said anything at all. And it was, she would think later, the most complete silence of her life. In the slow, gold hour after that fight, while the sun was still well above the horizon and the heat in the sand had begun to ease, Imani went down alone to the water and stood in the shallows with her wrap pulled up to her knees. The sea was calm now, almost playful, the way the sea is sometimes after it has nearly taken something from you and decided, in the end, to give it back. She watched a small green turtle, no larger than a dinner plate, crest the surface 10 meters away, and then sink again, in no particular hurry. She watched a thin shadow, low and curious, that might have been a stingray, or might have been a piece of driftwood. She watched her own brown ankles disappear and reappear in the white foam, the bandage on her right one long since rinsed clean. And she thought, I am 28 years old, and I've just told my employer that I love him, and the world has not ended. And then she laughed, quietly, at her own polished panic. When she came back up to the camp, Marcus was sitting on the sand with his bad foot raised on the lifeboat seat, weaving something between his hands. He had stripped 2 long fronds and had begun, very slowly, very inexpertly, to braid them. The result was already crooked. He had clearly been at it for a while. She sat down beside him on the sand. What are you making? A hat. For whom? For you. Marcus. It is going badly. It is going terribly. Yes. She watched him for a moment. Then she took the half-braid out of his hands and showed him, slowly, the simpler over-under her father had taught her on a porch in Georgia when she was 7. Marcus, who could read a balance sheet in 7 languages and 3 currencies, took an absurdly long time to learn the under-over of a palm braid. He was patient about being bad at it. He did not, as Imani had quietly suspected he would, become impatient or move on. He sat with the unfamiliar work in his hands and let himself be a beginner. By dusk, between them, they had a small, lopsided sun hat that fit no human head. Imani tried it on her own braids. It tilted catastrophically to the left. They both laughed. The hat went, ceremonially, on top of the drained tablet, where, for the rest of their stay on the island, it served as a small private joke, and as the world's most expensive scarecrow. That night, the rain did not come. The stars came instead. Imani had not seen stars like that since a camping trip in Georgia when she was 11, and she sat for a long time with her head tipped back on the sand, naming the constellations she still remembered. Marcus, beside her, did not interrupt. He watched the same sky. He did not, this time, say anything at all. She would think about that silence later, often. There are silences in long marriages that are bored, and there are silences that are angry, and there are silences that are merely tired. The silence on the sand that night was none of those. It was the silence of 2 people who had, for the first time in either of their adult lives, run out of work to do, and had discovered that the absence of work was not, as both of them had been taught, an emergency. It was simply, on a small, uninhabited island, an evening. On the 6th day, Marcus tried to talk her out of him. It is the kind of thing some men do when they have spent their lives believing they are not made for kindness, and someone they admire has just told them otherwise. Imani. Yes? You should not. Should not what? Be in love with me. She was building the fire. She did not look up. Why? I am cold, he said. I am a cold person. I am not, as it turns out, a very generous one. I have not been kind to you. I have not been kind to most of the people who have worked for me. I have not been kind to Vivian, though I have, technically, kept all my promises. I'm 34 years old, and I have never, in my adult life, been the person my mother thought I would be. You should not love a man like that. Imani took the curl of bark she was holding. She turned it once in her fingers. Marcus. Yes. Are you finished? I would like, if I may, to add. Add? That my schedule is impossible. That I have not been to the dentist in 3 years. That I cannot remember the last time I was on a beach in daylight without a press release behind it. That my refrigerator at home contains, at present, mustard and a single light bulb. That I have been to therapy precisely twice. That I do not, in fact, know how to dance. That I... Marcus. Yes. Stop. He stopped. She lit the bark. She set it under the kindling. The kindling caught. "Listen to me," she said. "Are you listening?" "Yes." "You are not a cold person. You are a frightened person. You have been frightened for 9 years. You learned to be frightened the year your mother went, and you got better at being frightened the year your father went. And you have built a very good company, and a very correct engagement, and a very tidy schedule on top of being frightened. And from a distance, all of it has looked like coldness. But it is not coldness. Coldness does not come down a ridge on a sprained ankle and refuse to call out. Coldness does not put a jacket over a wet woman in a lifeboat. Coldness does not say thank you to its assistant for a report on a beach. Coldness does not tell that assistant the truth about its lost mother and its lost father and its arranged engagement 4 nights running by a small fire on a small island when no one is making it. You are not cold, Marcus. You are kind. You are very, very kind. You are simply afraid that if anyone notices, you will be hurt again. He was quiet for a long time. The kindling settled. The flame steadied. Imani. Yes. That was the longest sentence I have ever heard you give without a tablet. I have been saving it. For 2 years. For 2 years. He laughed. It was a small, startled laugh. The kind a man laughs when he has not laughed in a long time. It was not a particularly elegant laugh. It was, Imani thought, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard him make. He came, on his bad ankle, very carefully around the fire. He did not touch her. He sat, instead, at her side, the way a person sits beside a friend on a bench. Imani. Yes. I am still going to ask you not to love me. Why? Because when we get off this island, and we will, I will have a great deal to undo, and it will not be quick, and it will be public, and it will be ugly, and I do not want you to be standing too close when it begins. She considered this. She thought about the office she would have to walk back into, and the trade press, and Vivian, and the elevator, and the small, careful notes she had been making for 2 years. She thought about being seen in those rooms as the thing they would call her, which was not assistant. She thought about it, honestly. She did not pretend, even to herself, that it would be easy. Marcus. Yes. I was not asking your permission. He looked at her. No, he said slowly. I do not suppose you were. The fire breathed between them. On the 7th day, the sea brought them a gift, a small wooden crate washed up on the south end of the beach at dawn, sealed with rope, dripping with weed. It was a galley supply box from the Eleanor. Imani, kneeling beside it, recognized the stamp at once. Marcus. Yes. Galley 3. Open it. She cut the rope with the folding tool. She lifted the lid. 2 sealed bottles of fresh water, a vacuum-sealed brick of chocolate, a small tin of biscuits, a first aid kit properly waterproof, a flare, of all things, dry and angry orange, a waterproof bag with 8 cans of chicken soup and a folded paper menu from the gala. Imani sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking. She looked up at Marcus, who was standing on his good foot, leaning on a piece of driftwood, watching her with an expression she could not name. Marcus? Yes? This is going to sound very strange. Tell me. I think I am going to cry over chicken soup. Imani. Yes? That sounds entirely reasonable. She did. She cried over chicken soup. He sat down next to her on the sand, slowly, and he did not say anything. And after a while she leaned her head briefly on his shoulder. It was the first time she had ever leaned on him. He did not move. He did not stiffen. He did not lift his arm to put it around her because that, too, would have been the wrong thing. And Marcus Knight, who had not always known what the right thing was, did, finally, on a small, uninhabited island, know. He let her lean. He let her cry. The salt on his shirt soaked up the salt on her cheek, and the morning was very, very quiet. That afternoon, he fired the flare. He did it in the right way, at the right moment, when the wind was steady and a single white sail had appeared, very small, on the horizon to the north. He did not say anything before he did it. He simply walked to the highest point of the beach, planted the flare, and triggered it. The orange burst rose up into the blue sky like a scream. The white sail turned. Imani, on the sand below, did not feel relief. She felt something stranger. She felt, suddenly, that the small island was about to take her real life away from her and put her back into the wrong life, and that the wrong life would have offices and elevators and trade press and Vivienne and Mr. Knight and Miss Carter, and not Marcus and Imani and a small fire and a thimble of water. She did not say this. She watched the sail turn. She turned instead to look at Marcus, who was watching the sail too. Marcus. Yes. When we are back. Yes. Will you? Yes. She had not even said the question. He turned on his bad ankle and he looked at her, and his eyes were very clear, and he said, Imani, whatever the question is. Yes. The yacht that came was a charter out of Antigua, 2 American couples on holiday, and a captain who had watched the storm from a safe harbor. They were polite, professional, slightly horrified. They wrapped Marcus and Imani in clean, dry towels. They radioed Antiguan Coast Guard, who patched through to the United States Coast Guard, who patched through, eventually, to the offices of Knight Industries in Manhattan, who had been searching for a yacht and a billionaire and an assistant for 7 days. The first lifeboat had been picked up on the 3rd morning, 80 miles to the east. Vivian was unhurt. Her father was unhurt. The chief financial officer was unhurt. They had been flown back to New York. The press had been told that Marcus Knight was missing. The press had not been told, yet, that Marcus Knight was in love. The story of those 7 missing days, in the narrow professional language of the maritime authorities, would later be filed as a routine inquiry. The Eleanor had taken on water in the cargo hold during the 2nd hour of the storm. Captain Voss had ordered the engine room evacuated at the correct moment, by the correct procedure, and had launched the lifeboats by the book. He had stayed with the yacht until the moment the second boat was clear, and then he had jumped, in the way captains have always jumped, and had been picked up 11 hours later by a fishing trawler out of St. Vincent. He had walked off that trawler in a borrowed dressing gown, with a small, tidy bandage on his right temple. And he had said only 2 things to the press, both of them in Dutch, and both of them, in translation, deeply unflattering to the late Robert Knight's maritime engineering choices. The yacht was not, in the technical sense, lost. She had run aground on a sandbar 14 kilometers east of the small island, and had been salvaged 3 weeks later by a recovery team out of Trinidad, and her hull had been written off, but her engines had been resold for a quiet, undisclosed sum. The Galley 3 supply box, which had washed up on a different beach, was the only artifact of the Eleanor that ever returned, intact, to the Knight family. It was placed, eventually, on a low shelf in Marcus's office, between an old photograph of his mother and a small green cloth-bound notebook that had been a gift, on a Tuesday in late February, from his executive assistant. The maritime authorities did not, in any of their reports, mention what had happened to those 2 passengers on a small, uninhabited island while they had been waiting for a sail on the horizon. What was the official term, after all, for 2 people who had begun a Friday morning as employer and assistant, and had ended a Friday morning, 8 days later, as something the official forms did not have a box for? The maritime authorities had no language, in their narrow professional vocabulary, for what had happened to those 2 passengers. They simply refused, in their tidy way, to write about it at all. The maritime authorities did not need that language. The two passengers had it. Between them, in private, they had it. The Americans on the charter yacht were retired schoolteachers from Vermont, two married couples on their 30th anniversary, and they handled the appearance of a billionaire and his executive assistant on a desert beach with a kindness that Imani would never forget. They asked no questions about the press release that the captain was, by then, certain would follow. They poured fresh water into clean glasses. They produced, from a small cooler, peeled oranges and a wedge of cheese, and 4 flat squares of dark chocolate that, between them, Marcus and Imani consumed in silence in fewer than 90 seconds. One of the wives, a soft-voiced, retired second-grade teacher named Marjorie, took Imani below decks and helped her out of the salt-stiff blouse and into a clean cotton dress 2 sizes too large, and then, without asking, took down Imani's salt-locked braids and rebraided them, very gently, the way Marjorie had once braided the hair of small girls in a public school in Burlington for 37 years. "Honey," Marjorie said when she was finished, "you and that man have been on that little island a while." "7 days, ma'am." "It shows." "How?" Marjorie considered her in the small cabin mirror. "You sit closer to him than an assistant sits." Imani did not answer. "That is not a criticism," Marjorie said gently. "Where I come from, we call that a marriage starting." She patted Imani's shoulder. She left her with the mirror. Imani looked at herself for a long time. Her face was thinner. Her cheeks were warmer. Her eyes were not the same eyes she had taken aboard the Eleanor on a Friday morning in late September. Something behind them had moved. She put on the borrowed cotton dress. She walked back up to the deck. Marcus was sitting on the bench at the stern, with a clean white towel around his shoulders, talking, in his quiet, steady voice, with the older of the 2 husbands. Marcus was thanking him. Marcus did not, ordinarily, thank people for things in Imani's 2 years of observation. He sent thank-you notes through Helen, who selected them from a small standing library. Now, on the stern of a stranger's boat, Marcus was thanking a retired Vermont schoolteacher named Frank, with his own mouth, for cheese and chocolate and clean water, and the loan of a clean dress for the woman I am with. It was the first time Imani had heard that phrase from him. She did not let on that she had heard it. She simply walked across the deck, past the older couples, and sat beside him on the bench, very close. Her shoulder touched his shoulder. He did not move away. The Americans, with great delicacy, all looked elsewhere. The flight back from Antigua to New York was the strangest 6 hours of Imani's life. The Night Industries jet had been sent down the moment the call came in. There were doctors on board, there were lawyers on board, there was a public relations vice president on board, a small, ferocious woman named Helen Ojo, who had been at Marcus's company for 15 years, and had, by Imani's count, been the second person to ever say her first name out loud. The first had been, of course, Marcus. Helen took one look at the 2 of them, in their borrowed clean clothes, with their salt-stiff hair and their wind-burned cheeks, and their shared, exhausted quietness. And she said, very calmly, "Mr. Knight, we need to talk." Marcus said, "Helen, yes." He said it without looking away from Imani. Imani sat very still in her aisle seat. The doctor had wrapped her ankle properly. The other doctor had given her a sandwich she could not eat. The plane smelled of leather and antiseptic and a fresh lavender that someone had thoughtfully sprayed. Helen took a seat opposite Marcus. "Mr. Knight," she said, "the engagement to Miss Ashworth will be ended. Today. Today." "In what manner?" "In the most truthful one you can write, Helen." Helen looked at Imani. She did not, to her credit, look at her with malice. She looked at her with the careful, attentive, slightly amused gaze of a woman who has just been told a long, complicated story by an island. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "Did you tell him to do this?" "No, ma'am." "Did he tell you he was going to do this?" "He has not told me anything yet, ma'am." He has only said yes. Helen considered her. Helen considered Marcus. Helen considered the situation. Mr. Knight. Yes, Helen. I have been telling you for 11 months that you were not going to marry that woman. I know. I am very glad it took an actual hurricane. So am I. Helen permitted herself a small, very dry smile. Then she opened her laptop, and, in the steady professional silence of a private jet at 35,000 feet, she began to write the press release. The press release did not make Imani look like a homewrecker. Helen Ojo was too good for that. The press release said, simply, that after a serious yachting accident in the Caribbean, in which Mr. Knight and his assistant had survived together on an uninhabited island for 7 days, the Knight family wished to announce, with deep gratitude to all who had searched for them, that the engagement between Mr. Knight and Miss Vivian Ashworth had been mutually concluded, and that the two families remained on terms of long-standing personal friendship. Helen had, before drafting it, called Vivian. Vivian had agreed. Vivian, Imani would learn later, had cried briefly on the call, and then she had said, very calmly, "Helen, please tell Marcus that I am glad he has found her. And please tell her, from me, that he is more loyal than he looks." Imani would never forget that line. She would, much later, repeat it to her own daughter. The plane landed at Teterboro at 4 in the morning. The waiting line of black SUVs was longer than Imani had ever seen it. The waiting line of cameras, behind a hastily erected barrier, was longer still. Helen exited first, with a clipboard, and gave a 30-second statement that was perfect and gave the press absolutely nothing to chew on, the way Helen's statements always did. Marcus exited second, on his bad ankle, leaning very lightly on a cane that had appeared on the plane as if Helen had conjured it. He did not look at the cameras. He looked back into the cabin, where Imani was still standing in the doorway, in a borrowed grey cashmere wrap, with her tablet, somehow, still under her arm. "Imani." "Yes?" "Walk with me." "I am the assistant, Marcus." "You are the woman I am in love with." "There are cameras." "There are always cameras." "There will be." "I know." She thought about it for a half-second. She thought about the careful, small life she had built, and what would happen to it now, and how nothing would ever be small again. She thought also of her father, in a flannel shirt at a forest cabin, telling her once, when she was 9, "Baby, anything worth standing in a fire for is worth standing in a light for." She walked down the steps with him. They did not hold hands. Helen, 10 paces ahead, would not have allowed that. But they walked together, in step, on his cane and her bandaged ankle, and the cameras did what cameras do. And the next morning, the front page of every business paper in New York carried a photograph of Marcus Knight, billionaire, walking off a private jet with his executive assistant. And the photograph, taken at the wrong angle for the photographers and the right angle for everyone else, showed not a homewrecker and a victim, but two people who had survived something, side by side. The first reaction in the trade press was, predictably, an act of imagination not supported by any of the available facts. 2 industry blogs filed pieces, within 4 hours, that referred to Imani as the assistant who had survived the wreck of the Air. A respected business columnist, who ought to have known better, devoted 3 paragraphs of his Sunday column to a long, fond, faintly antique speculation about what a man like Marcus Knight had eaten and slept and possibly thought about during 7 days on a small, uninhabited island, and concluded with a sentence that referred to Imani only as his companion. A morning television program, which had been running a soft segment about the Knight Foundation's clean water work for 3 weeks, quietly killed the segment and replaced it with a panel about whether long-term assistants ever marry their bosses. The panel concluded that they did, occasionally, but never well, and that the historical record was, in fact, a melancholy library of warning. Helen Ojo, watching the panel from her corner office at 6:15 in the morning, made one phone call to the producer of the program, and the panel, that afternoon, was quietly retracted from the network's catch-up service. The producer, when she next saw Helen at an industry breakfast, did not bring up the matter, and Helen, in the small, icy way Helen had, pretended not to remember. Imani, during those first weeks, did not read the trade press. She had asked her new assistant, David, on the morning she had returned, to print her exactly one summary a day, on a single sheet of paper, with no opinion attached and no link included, and to leave it on the corner of her desk before 9 in the morning. David, who had a degree in literature and a quiet sense of dignity, did this for the next 30 mornings without comment. Imani read each sheet exactly once with her morning coffee, and then she folded each sheet exactly once and put it into a small file in a low drawer of her desk that she had labeled, in her own clear handwriting, for later. She did not read them again. She did not, as her mother had once advised her over a pound cake in Atlanta, allow the small, mean voices of small, mean rooms to set the temperature of her own large, warm one. What surprised her most about those first weeks was not the columns and not the panels, and not the soft pity of women in elevators who had once asked her, kindly, to bring an espresso. What surprised her most was how quickly the weather changed. By the third week, the trade press had moved on to a new shipping merger in Singapore, and the producers who had killed the clean water segment had quietly reinstated it with a new title, and the soft pity in the elevators had been replaced, in some women's faces, with a different and more interesting expression. The expression was not envy. So what was it then? It was, Imani would later think, recognition. The kind of recognition one woman gives another when she has watched her come, very calmly, through a small public storm, and has decided to take notes on how it was done. Imani, in time, would meet several of those women again, in conference rooms and at fundraising dinners, and once, by accident, in a Brooklyn bookstore on a Saturday afternoon. And each of them would say to her some version of the same sentence, which was, "I want you to know that I was watching, and that I am glad you stayed." What the trade press did not understand, and what Helen Ojo had decided early not to explain, was that the 7 days on the island had not been a romance in any sense the trade press would have recognized. Where, after all, was the elevator? Where was the company retreat? Where was the back of the corporate jet? Romances, in the trade press's understanding, took place in those rooms, and only in those rooms. The 7 days on the island had taken place over a small, clean fire and a thimble of fresh water, and a sprained ankle bound in a strip of tote bag lining. Helen Ojo, asked once at an industry breakfast about the matter, had refused even to dignify the question with the small, icy answer she usually preferred, and had laughed, very briefly, into her espresso, and had changed the subject. The trade press, watching her laugh, had understood that there was no template for what had happened, and, rather than admit that it had no template, the trade press chose, mostly, to write something else. The next 4 weeks were not easy. Imani would not pretend, later, that they were. She moved out of her studio in Brooklyn and into a small, furnished apartment in Murray Hill that the company kept for visiting executives. She did not move into Marcus's penthouse. He did not ask her to. He understood, without having to be told, why she would not. She returned to work on a Monday, in a navy dress that was new, with a navy folder that was new, and a new assistant of her own, a quiet, careful young man named David, who had been promoted from the legal team. The trade press, which had been gentler than she had expected, began to find new things to cover. Vivian Ashworth posted, on a private account, a photograph of herself laughing at a cooking class in Provence. Helen Ojo, in her corner office, sent one short message to the entire executive team. "The matter is closed. Work the work." Imani worked the work. She also, in the evenings, ate dinner with Marcus. He picked her up at her building on the third evening. He brought a small bunch of plain white tulips, the kind a careful Nan brings when he is not sure what flowers a woman likes, and is determined not to overstep. He took her to a small Italian place in the West Village, 2 tables, family run, the owner an old friend of his mother's. He held the door. He pulled out the chair. He did not order for her. He waited until she had ordered for herself. Across the candlelit table, Imani Carter looked at the man who had, for 2 years, called her Miss Carter, and she said, "Marcus, I have a confession." "Yes." "I am still your assistant." "Yes." "And I am still in love with you." "Yes." "And I would like, at some point, to stop being one of those things, but not the other." He thought about this. His eyes were very clear in the candlelight. The cut on his forehead from the storm had healed into a small, clean line above his eyebrow. His ankle, under the table, was still bandaged, but he had walked in unaided. "Imani." "Yes." "Take 6 months." 6 months. 6 months, while we are still in the same building, and you are still my assistant, and I am still your boss. We will go very slowly. We will be very correct. I will not put a hand on you in this office, or in any office, or in any place where you would feel even slightly uncertain. If, at the end of 6 months, you wish to take another role inside the company, Helen has already prepared 3 options for you, all senior, all at the level of vice president, all reporting to the chief operating officer, and not, in any way, to me. If you wish to take a role outside the company, I will write you the recommendation letter that 2 years ago I should already have written, and I will ask nothing of you. And if, at the end of 6 months, you wish to choose me, then I will, with your permission, ask you a question that I have not yet earned the right to ask." She listened to all of it. The tulips were on the table between them. The candle was a small, warm yellow. "Marcus." "Yes." "You were on that island a week." "Yes." "And you came back a different man." "I came back," he said, "with the man my mother thought I was." She did not at that moment reach for his hand. They had agreed they would not. But she allowed herself, briefly, to look at him, fully, without flinching, with all the small, careful notes of 2 years rearranging themselves quietly inside her into a different, larger, kinder shape. 6 months, she said. 6 months. She raised her water glass. He raised his. The waiter, who knew Marcus, who had known Eleanor Knight, who was nearly 70 and not impressed by anyone, paused at the next table and gave a small, quiet, approving nod. The 6 months passed slowly, the way good months do. Imani moved sideways inside Knight Industries, on Helen's arrangement, into a senior strategy role 2 floors up from the executive suite. She built a small team. She kept long hours. She spoke at one industry conference in Miami on operational excellence in family-held shipping firms, and the audience, at the end, gave her the kind of standing ovation that does not happen by accident. Her mother, in Atlanta, watching the live stream on her tablet at the school library, cried for 6 minutes, and then went back to shelving books. Marcus, during those 6 months, did not call her his girlfriend. He called her Imani, and only Imani, and he saw her on Tuesday evenings, on Friday evenings, and every other Sunday for breakfast, and he learned, slowly, the names of her oldest friends, the order of her Sunday calls home, the brand of jasmine tea she drank when she was tired, the shape of her braid pattern when she had been to her stylist, and the precise expression on her face when she was about to disagree with him about something in a meeting, and was choosing, out of professional courtesy, not to. In the second month of their 6, on a Friday in late November, Marcus came with her to Atlanta. He had never been to Atlanta in any capacity that did not involve a conference center and a black SUV and a 40-minute window at an airport hotel. Imani drove him, in a small grey rental car, from the airport to her mother's house in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood lined with old oak trees and basketball hoops on garage doors. She told him, on the way, what to expect. Her mother's name was Yvonne. Her mother was 62. Her mother would, on first meeting, attempt to feed him 3 things, refuse to be helped in the kitchen, and ask him at least one question about his own mother. Her mother had been married to Imani's father, a forest ranger named Lincoln Carter, for 31 years, and had been a widow now for 4. Her mother did not, generally, like men in suits. Marcus took off his suit at the gas station on the way. He came out of the small concrete bathroom in dark jeans and a soft grey crewneck, with his expensive shoes left in the trunk and a pair of plain leather sneakers on his feet that Imani had picked out for him the week before in a small shop on Bleecker Street, when he watched her with the attentive, slightly bewildered expression of a man who is being kindly dressed by someone who cares. He looked, in Imani's mother's driveway, like a different man. Imani's mother, opening the door, took one careful look at him and said, "Imani, your father would have liked the shoes. I picked the shoes, Mama." "I know." Yvonne Carter, formidable in a green cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on a very nice high forehead, opened her arms first to her daughter, then to her daughter's billionaire, with no observable difference in warmth. She fed him sweet potato pie, fried chicken, and collard greens. She refused his offer to wash dishes. She asked him, over coffee, what his mother had been like. Marcus told her. He spoke for 15 minutes, slowly, without his executive cadence, about a pediatric nurse in Detroit who had read to him at night even when he was 12. Yvonne listened. Yvonne, at the end, took off her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Knight." "Marcus, please." "Marcus." "Yes, ma'am." "Your mama raised you right, even when she had to leave it half done." "Thank you." "And my Imani has been finishing the work." "Yes, ma'am, she has." Yvonne nodded, once, as if a small accountant inside her had marked a column in a private ledger. She sent them out, after dinner, to walk around the block, the way she had once sent her own daughter out to walk around the block with the boy who would, 20 years later, become a very steady cardiologist in Houston, and not, as it had turned out, the right boy for Imani. Yvonne stood in the doorway and watched them go, in their borrowed Atlanta dusk, the billionaire in the soft grey sweater and the executive assistant in jeans. And she did not, for the first time in 4 years, feel that her late husband was missing this. When they came back, Yvonne had set out 3 slices of pound cake on 3 small plates with 3 small forks, and she did not, for the rest of the visit, treat Marcus Knight as anything other than a man who had been brought home, properly, by her grown daughter. On the flight back to New York, Marcus sat very still in his seat for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "Imani." "Yes." "I would like to invite your mother to New York, whenever she would like to come. Once, twice, every month if she wishes. The company keeps an apartment 3 blocks from my office, and it is empty most of the year, and it has a view of the river, and your mother should be on a river view at least 4 times a year. I would also like, with her permission, to put her on a small standing retainer as a community engagement consultant for the foundation, because I have read her resume, and a school librarian who has run a free Saturday reading program for 19 years is a person we should be paying." Imani turned in the leather seat and looked at him. "Marcus." "Yes. You wrote that in your head while we were walking around the block. I wrote most of it during the pie. It will not be quick to convince her. I have time." She laughed. He smiled, the small, not quite smile that, in 2 years, she had once considered the limit of his expression, and which had now, on its own, become something larger. He bought, on her advice, a refrigerator that contained more than mustard. He went, on her insistence, to a real therapist for a real year of weekly sessions, which he afterwards described, very dryly, as the 2nd most useful island he had ever visited. He did not, during those 6 months, propose. He had said he would not. He was, as Vivian had once told her, more loyal than he looked. Helen Ojo presented the 3 role options on a Tuesday morning in late February, in the same small glass meeting room where, a year earlier, Imani had once delivered 3 rounds of espresso during a quarterly review. Helen brought no laptop, no folder, and only one pen, which Imani had given her 2 Christmases ago. Helen liked, on important mornings, to use a pen that someone she respected had given her. Helen had never, in 11 years, used a Knight Industries branded pen for anything she considered an actual decision. Imani. Yes, Helen. 3 options. You will hate 2 of them and love one of them, and the one you love is not, I think, the one Mr. Knight would choose for you. Tell me. Option 1. Senior Vice President of Global Operations, reporting to the Chief Operating Officer. 22,000 staff under your supervision, mostly logistics and warehousing in 3 countries. Compensation package 3 times your current. Public-facing role. You will be on a Bloomberg cover within 18 months. It is the role most companies would build a press release around. Option 2. Vice President of Foundation Strategy, reporting to me. Smaller team, around 40 people. You would oversee the Foundation's clean water programs in the Caribbean, the school library programs in the southern United States, and a new initiative in pediatric care that, between us, I have been quietly designing for 19 months, and which the board has just agreed to fund. Compensation package 2.5 times your current. You will not be on a Bloomberg cover, but in 7 years, your work will have moved more drinking water than the Bloomberg cover ever would. Imani was already, very faintly, smiling. Option 3. Option 3 is your idea. You write it. Helen, what would you like to be in this company? A real answer, not the answer that pleases the press release. The role does not exist yet. We will build it around you. The board has authorized this. Mr. Knight, when I told him, said, Helen, build whichever one she wants. I am not consulted in this. That is, by the way, the most respectful thing he has ever said to me about a woman who is not his mother. Imani sat for a moment in the quiet glass room, and she thought about a forest ranger in North Georgia, and a pediatric nurse in Detroit, and a thimble of fresh water on a small, uninhabited island. And she thought about herself. Helen. Yes? Option 2. I thought so. With one adjustment. Tell me. I want the pediatric initiative to lead, not lag. I want it on the same operational footing as the clean water programs from year 1. I want a clinic partnership in Detroit. And I want my mother on the design committee for the school library programs, on a paid retainer. And I want her to keep her job in Atlanta until she chooses, herself, to leave it. Helen Ojo, who in 15 years at Knight Industries had been described by 3 different chairmen as unflappable, allowed her face to do the small, private thing it did when she was very, quietly, pleased. Imani. Yes. You will run this foundation better than I have. I will run it next to you. That is not the structure I drew. It is the structure I am asking for. Helen looked at her. Helen, in the privacy of the small glass room, took off her own pen, the one Imani had given her, and held it out across the table, the way a small monarch hands over a small ceremonial sword. Take it, she said. You will need it more than I will. I am going to teach you everything I know, and then I am going to retire, eventually, with the dignity of a woman who chose her own successor. Imani took the pen. She turned it in her hand. Helen Ojo had been, in her own way, the second most important woman in Knight Industries for 15 years. Helen Ojo, on a Tuesday morning in late February, had just made room for the most important. There was a particular quality to the way the late winter light came in through the small glass meeting room that morning, slanting low across the conference table and catching the gold rim of Helen's coffee cup. And Imani would remember that light, later, as the exact color of being properly seen at work for the first time. She had been competent for many years. Competence, in some rooms, is a kind of invisibility, the way a steady hand on a tiller becomes the assumption rather than the achievement. The light through that glass wall, on a Tuesday morning in late February, was the first sustained moment in her professional life when competence had been allowed to look, instead, like something the room arranged itself around. Imani moved out of the executive suite that Friday. Her new office was on the 22nd floor, 3 doors down from Helen, with a view that included one corner of the river and an excellent slice of late afternoon light. Marcus did not, by his own quiet rule, visit her there during business hours. He sent, on her first morning, a single small white tulip in a clear glass on her desk. There was no card. There did not need to be. In the 7th month, he asked her if she would come with him to a small island in the Bahamas for 4 days to attend the wedding of an old friend. The friend was a man named Daniel Okafor, who had been Marcus's roommate at university and who was marrying a pediatric surgeon from Lagos. The wedding was small, on a quiet beach, on a property the Okafor family had owned for generations. There would be 60 guests. The forecast was clear. Marcus had not been on a beach since the storm. Imani said yes. The wedding was beautiful. The bride's mother wore deep emerald lace. The groom's mother wore amber silk. Imani wore a long, plain, ivory linen dress that her own mother, 400 miles away in Atlanta, had helped her choose over a video call. She wore her hair down and parted to one side. She wore very small gold hoop earrings that had been her grandmother's. She did not wear a wrap because the evening was warm. Marcus wore a navy linen suit. He did not wear a tie. He carried in his inside pocket something he had carried for 4 months and had not yet, by his own promise, taken out. After the dinner, after the toasts, after the Okafor uncles had begun to dance, Marcus took Imani by the hand and led her, very slowly, away from the long table of candles, down a narrow sandy path, to a small empty stretch of beach. The moon was high. The water was silver. A frigate bird, somewhere very high, passed against the moon, very white. Imani turned to him. Marcus? Yes. You are about to say something. I am. It has been 7 months. I know. You said 6. I added 1. Why? Because I wanted to be sure that I was choosing you with all of me, and not with the man on the island. And I am. He took the box from his inside pocket. It was a small, plain, dark green velvet box. He did not, to his credit, drop to one knee in the sand. He simply held the box in his open palm between them. Imani Carter. Yes, Marcus. On a Friday morning in late September, 2 years and 7 months ago, I hired you because your resume was the most precise document I had ever read, and because your cover letter, which you will not remember, contained the line, "I do not believe in being indispensable, only in being useful." I did not know, that morning, that I was hiring the woman who would, much later, save my life on a small uninhabited island. I did not know, that morning, that I was hiring the woman who would, much later, teach me, in a thimble of fresh water and a bound ankle and a small clean fire, the difference between being correct and being kind. I did not know, that morning, that I was hiring the woman my mother would have liked very much. I know it now. He paused. Imani. Yes. Will you please marry me? She looked at him. She looked at the box. She looked, briefly, at the sea, which was the same warm, dark sea that had once tried to take them, and instead had given them this. She looked back at him. Marcus. Yes. On a Friday morning in late September, 2 years and 7 months ago, I took the job because your company had the best dental plan in the city, and because I had, very privately, looked at the photograph at the top of the careers page and decided that if I had to bring a man coffee for 2 years, he might as well be a beautiful one. Imani, I am not finished. My apologies. I did not know, that morning, that I was applying to work for the man who would, much later, take off his jacket and put it over my shoulders in a lifeboat. I did not know, that morning, that I was applying to work for the man who would, much later, share a thimble of water with me, and a small fish on a green stick, and a quiet silence under a windbreak in a warm rain. I did not know, that morning, that I was applying to work for the man my father would have called, after about 10 minutes of conversation, son. I know it now. She put her hand into his open palm. Yes, she said. Please. He closed the box. He closed her hand. He brought it, slowly, to his mouth, and he kissed her knuckles, the way her father had once kissed her grandmother's hand, at her grandmother's 80th birthday, in a small kitchen in Atlanta, in front of a sheet cake. The frigate bird, very high, passed again. Behind them, 200 meters away, on the long table of candles, the band shifted into a slow song, and Daniel Okafor, who had a sharp eye, looked across the beach and saw the small, distant shape of his old roommate kissing a woman's hand under a moon. And Daniel Okafor, who was a better friend than he looked, said nothing to anyone, and turned back to his bride. A year later, on a different beach, on a quiet morning in late September, Imani Knight stood at the edge of a long, curving stretch of white-grey sand, and she watched her husband, in rolled-up linen trousers, walking slowly along the tide line, with their small niece riding on his shoulders. The niece was Daniel Carter's daughter. She had just turned 2. Her name was Eleanor. She had been born during the engagement, on a quiet evening in March, and had been named, with Marcus's careful and unspoken permission, and over a long telephone call, between Daniel in Houston and his sister in New York, after a pediatric nurse in Detroit. And she was, in her Uncle Marcus's professional opinion, the loudest and most tyrannical creature Knight Industries had ever encountered. He had spent the morning teaching her, very seriously, to point at the curl of smoke from their breakfast fire, long before she would learn to point at the letters in a book. Imani, on the sand, with one hand resting very lightly on her own stomach, where, in 7 months, a second, very small, loud creature would arrive, watched the two of them, and she thought, if my father were here, he would say, "Baby, that man is a forest ranger after all." She did not say it. She kept it. She kept all the small, careful notes of all the years, the way she had always kept them. Only now, she kept them in a different color. Marcus turned, at the far end of the beach, and saw her. He raised the small Eleanor onto his shoulders a little higher, and he waved. Imani waved back. Behind her, a fire was burning, very small, very clean, in a stone ring at the edge of the property. The smoke went straight up into a pale gold morning. A frigate bird, somewhere very high, passed against the sky. Pull your chair closer. Stay a while longer. The cold boss, who had once refused to look at the sky, who had once dismissed a storm called Henrietta, who had once said Miss Carter 817 times without ever saying Imani, was, at this moment, on a beach far from Manhattan, lifting a 4-year-old girl onto his shoulders and walking her, very carefully, along the warm tide of a sea that had, once, tried to take everything from him, and had, instead, in its own quiet way, given him everything he had ever needed. He had needed, it turned out, only a small, uninhabited island and a thimble of fresh water, and a woman who knew how to read smoke. He had needed, it turned out, only her. Years later, when the second small, loud creature had arrived and learned to walk, and then to run, and then to shout "Daddy" across the long marble hallway of an apartment that had once contained only mustard and a single light bulb, Imani Knight would sometimes sit on the small balcony of that apartment in the early evening and look out at a river she had once watched from a corner of her own 22nd floor office. She would think about all the small, careful notes she had once made, in 2 years of 70-hour weeks, about a man who had said Miss Carter 817 times. She had given those notes, in their small, private way, to her mother in Atlanta, and her mother had filed them in a green, cloth-bound notebook on a shelf in a house that smelled of old books and sweet potatoes. And she had said, the day she filed the last of them, that this was the kind of family record that ought to be kept for grandchildren, and not for journalists. The Knight Foundation, in those years, opened a pediatric care center in Detroit, on a quiet street near the 2-story house where Eleanor Knight had once read to a small, frightened 12-year-old at night. The center was named, on Marcus's quiet insistence, after Eleanor. It was opened, on a clear morning in October, by Imani Carter, who cut the ribbon with a pair of scissors that her own husband had once used in a forest cabin in North Georgia, and which her daughter, in a small, unsentimental way, had carried in a tote bag from Atlanta on the same flight. The press took photographs. The press, for once, used Yvonne's correct first name. The press did not, that day, mention shipping companies or quarterly results or the engagement that had once been broken on a private jet at 4 a.m. at Teterboro. The press, for that one morning, only wrote about a pediatric center in Detroit, and about a pediatric nurse who had once, in another century, taken care of children there. Eleanor Carter, age 4, in a small navy dress and very serious shoes, held her grandmother's hand at the ribbon. The smaller creature, age 1, slept on his father's shoulder. Marcus Knight, in a navy linen suit, stood very still and let his eyes go briefly hot, the way a man's eyes go hot when his late mother has, on a sidewalk in Detroit, finally been seen. Imani, beside him, did not, this time, look away from the camera. She had spent a long time, once, looking away from cameras. She had, very privately, decided that she was finished with that. She put her hand into her husband's open palm. He closed it. The frigate bird, somewhere very high above the parking lot of a pediatric center in Detroit, on a clear morning in October, passed against the sky.